Strix Halo, or the AI 395 Max from AMD, the Ryzen Ultimate processor, is here in the GMKtec Mini PC. 128 gigabytes of memory, an 8060S GPU built in. This is an APU, but this APU graphics is as good as an NVIDIA 4060M. And this is in a mini PC form factor, but you can run AI and do anything that requires 128 gigabytes of memory. And what you might not understand with this platform is the memory bandwidth on this is as good as Threadripper TRX 50. Basically the same memory bandwidth. Sort of nuts, I know. Let's unpack what you get in the box if you like to order this, because it's a pretty awesome Rock'em or Vulcan development appliance. A mini PC that can game without a truly discrete GPU, so probably better longevity and reliability. But at 4060, you can play at 1440p games, most AAA games today in the middle of 2025 at about 60 FPS, 1440p. And if you turn down the settings or you use FrameGen or anything like that, you can go even beyond that. The thing that I want to explore is using this as a platform for AI-enabled home automation, because this is enough AI horsepower at a low enough power point that it makes me really excited. All right, here is your installation guide, your multi-language manual showing you about all the options of your new GMKtec EVO. Also here we have an HDMI cable, our power brick, and our power cord, and the warranty card. If you have problems, feel free to scan your QR code. This shipped from the US for what that's worth, so I thought that was interesting. Our power brick is 19.5 volts at 11.6 amps. That is up to 230 watts. For faster setup, avoid connecting the LAN initially. Connecting might trigger long updates, delaying desktop access. You know that $1 trillion company has messed up when in the packing material for the machine, they're basically telling you Windows is going to harass you more if it has a network connection, so don't let it have a network connection, because it gets all handsy and possessive with wanting to create an account. You might have erred. I don't know why shareholders are not up in arms. I guess the shareholders are too ignorant to understand what's going on, because it's not in their long-term best interest. It's only hastening the year of the Linux desktop, which, by the way, we will be putting Linux on this, because Linux, especially an Arch-based distro, something like CachyOS, is an easy install. I can easily recommend that. We also, on the forum, have a guide for installing Arch that includes BTRFS subvolumes, and you can do snapshots with that, and that will apply to this platform as well, even though this is not a laptop, because Strix Halo and all the other stuff. All right, so let's take a look at our port configuration. At the back here, we've got USB 4, Type-C. We will be testing that. DisplayPort, HDMI, full-size DisplayPort too. 2 USB 5 gigabit ports, a USB 10 gigabit port, and our 2.5 gig Ethernet port. DC-in jack and our combination headphone microphone jack, TRRS. At the front, we've got 2 more super speed ports, USB 4 port, full-size SD card slot, a P mode button, that's interesting, power button, and another TRRS headphone jack. On this side, we've also got the fan mode. And look, this entire section is intake, and then you've got exhaust here. I can see here that they've installed a 2280 M.2, and there's room enough for another 2280 M.2. It's another PCIe Gen 4 M.2 slot. I'm not going to disassemble this further because I don't want to mess up the thermal cooling solution interface with this, but know that this platform's memory is not upgradable. You can't upgrade to 128 gigabytes, so what you get at factory configuration time is what you get. 64 gigabytes would be a good option if you're not super interested in the machine learning thing, or if you're doing the machine learning thing kind of as a hobby. 128 gigs definitely opens up a lot of options. This can go toe-to-toe with the NVIDIA Spark product in terms of capabilities on paper. The difference is going to be the software platform and how AMD brings that together. At the time that I'm doing this video, NVIDIA hasn't released the DGX Spark platform, and we know that there are DGX Spark implementations coming from NVIDIA and MSI and Dell and HP and other companies, and so it's going to be really interesting to see how that shakes out. Oh, there's our wireless card. This is the RZ wireless card, which is the one that AMD recommends for this platform. This is the one that also, if you look online, it's had a little bit of a rocky and storied history in an open source context. But in July 2025, if you're using kernel 6.14.6 or newer with the appropriate firmware, it's a basically good to pretty good experience. So that's way better than non-functional and hair-raisingly frustrating that it was prior to that. With the M.2 where it is in the plastic housing, this also might be a fairly easy platform to mod. Maybe I'm going to mod in an Oculink port or something like that that would be even faster than USB 4. But for now, we'll leave it be. It's a very nice aluminum housing, but I'm surprised that they didn't incorporate the aluminum into the heat dissipation material somehow. Like, you know, giving a thermal connection to the aluminum just to increase the passive cooling a bit more. The initial out-of-the-box experience was pretty good with this. The Windows installer was not configured to be the onerous, you know, you must sign on and do stuff, you know, that Microsoft is sort of famous for. I did leave the network port unplugged. And the level of bloat is minimal. There is a GMKtec app installed for AI that you can sign in with WeChat or use. I'm not going to be showing that in this particular video. You can put your email in and a code and activate it. And it looks like it's interesting software, but that's maybe something you can explore on their website or download and run yourself on whatever hardware you have. Also, very interesting, it has the minimal driver for the 8060S, the built-in GPU. It doesn't have Adrenalin installed. Most of the time on this kind of platform, even if it wasn't this insanely amazing APU that you can actually game on, there is a shortcut or an installer or something that runs as soon as you get to the desktop that'll reach out to AMD's website and try to download and install the latest Adrenalin driver. This has got like the stub OEM Adrenalin, or the stub OEM like GPU driver, which doesn't include the Adrenalin software. And that would be really important from a gaming aspect as well. Also, out of the box, the defaults were 64 gig and 64 gig. So this is a 128 gig configuration with 64 gigs reserved for the GPU and 64 gigs reserved for the platform. I don't mean that critically. I'm not criticizing that. That doesn't seem like an insane default. The reason you would do that is if you expected somebody to be running legacy software that tries to query how much dedicated GPU memory you have and then gives you the option to run models. And 64 gigabytes is plenty for Windows. So splitting it down the middle, if you're planning to run legacy AI software, then okay, that makes sense. On a platform that is shared memory, or a platform that understands that the memory on the system is shared between the GPU and the CPU, like it's the same pool of memory, it would probably be more sane if this defaulted to, 512 megabytes of reserved memory. We've shown that with Vulkan and Vulkan backends for AI learning, so Vulkan in a gaming context as well as Vulkan in an AI context, it understands that well enough that you can still game at 60 FPS even though you've got 512 megabytes of reserved memory for your GPU, because with new enough drivers, the platform is going to allocate ever how much memory it needs for the GPU from the pool of system memory. This is more efficient and sort of a better way to do it. Okay, so in the latest version of the Adrenalin driver, AMD did add the option to reconfigure the VRAM, but it doesn't work on this Strix Halo platform. It does work on other platforms, interestingly. You can still configure it through the BIOS, and the BIOS option is pretty good. There's also a guide on the GMKtec website. So you're not out of luck, you just got to use the BIOS to reconfigure it. Let's do that BIOS tour now. Okay, from our BIOS tour, there's actually a lot here. APU is a great platform for the BIOS out of the box. It's in performance mode, and you will hear the fan on this platform. 128 gigs of LPDDR5 at 8,000 mega transfers. It's pretty awesome. AI Max Plus 395 with Radeon 860S. Under advanced, auto power on. This will power on when the system loses power. Wake on LAN, which is enabled. Wake on USB, which is good. S5 RTC wake. This will let you wake at a fixed time, hour, minute, and second, or a dynamic time. So if you want your computer to come on automatically at 8 a.m. every day and you shut it down, this will let you do that. Graphics configuration, iGPU configuration, auto. You can do UMA specified and specified size here, which is great. It gives you all the options. You don't necessarily have all of the options to do this in every BIOS. In Windows, you can use Adrenalin, but in Linux, it's not as easy to do this. And so being able to specify it in BIOS is really awesome, especially if you're a Linux user. TPM support, CPU configuration, no execute mode, SVM, IOMMU, SMT, core performance boost. All this looks pretty awesome. can disable the LAN or wireless LAN or onboard SD or audio if you're using this in a commercial context. You know, it's got the Kensington lock port. Also, set a password and secure boot. You got your standard issue boot options. That's pretty much it. It does not expose the AMD CBS or PBS menus or any of the OEM menus, but overall this is a pretty complete BIOS. I'm pretty happy with this BIOS. Well, let's see how our GMKtec machine stacks up against other Strix Halo platforms, and in general, just how it's doing. We'll start with games. Here's our Borderlands performance. It's right in line with what we'd expect. It's comparable to the Framework desktop and the EVO-X2. I also have the 64 gig version that I'm going to be taking a look at in a different video. And yeah, the 64 gig version has a little different hardware configuration, and we're going to see that in the gaming benchmarks. For 1440p, yeah, 60 to 62 FPS. This is pretty good at the Ultra preset. Clear Obscure difference is basically identical performance at the 1080p medium preset across all three configurations. Interestingly, at the 1440p preset, the performance does vary a little more than I expected between the Framework desktop and the GMKtec EVO-X2. I explored this to the point of swapping around SSDs between the platforms, and it was repeatable, but I'm not sure that on the Framework side that this wasn't down to power management or possibly BIOS settings, because the inside BIOS is a little different than what GMKtec has in their BIOS. GMKtec's BIOS actually exposes more options, but is a more server-ish BIOS. It's still wild to me that you can play Cyberpunk at the 1080p high preset at over 100 FPS on a platform like this. This APU is really thumping good performance. Stepping it up to 1440p, you're at over 84 FPS. That is very, very good for an APU. I always like to test Deus Ex Mankind Divided, and over 100 FPS at 1080p, yeah, I'll take it. But a respectable showing from all three of our Strix Halo platforms here. And the spread from 68 to 74 FPS on the 1440p Ultra preset, very, very good. Final Fantasy Dawn Trail, the spread here from 97 to 111 FPS is really good. We've got basically identical performance between our Framework desktop and our GMKtec EVO-X2. This also underscores that differences in the platform configuration can make a little bit of a performance difference depending on the game. In this case, there's functionally no performance difference, but we saw in some other gaming titles that there was a little bit of a performance difference between the Framework and the GMKtec. And this is probably to do with low-level settings in the BIOS, possibly to do with the amount of reserved VRAM. That's an exercise left to the reader. Monster Hunter Wilds at the 1080p medium preset from 72 to 77 FPS, I'll take it. Monster Hunter Wilds 1440p medium preset, over 60 FPS in all three cases, entirely playable. Make sure you use the correct graph. And I always like to test an older title like Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and again, mind-blowing, you can get this kind of performance on the 1080p highest preset from an APU. 83 FPS to 93 FPS on our 1440p highest preset, again, shockingly good. Let's switch over to productivity. For 3D Mark, our CPU profile, 1 thread. It's very, very similar performance between all three of our configurations. 2 threads, again, very similar performance across all three of our configurations. 4 threads, 8 threads, 16 threads, max threads. And basically identical performance in the max thread configuration. Notice also the GMKtec EVO-X2 pulls ahead very slightly here. This is mainly to do with power budget because our memory and compute is all packaged in one unit, and having less memory means there's more power available for the rest of the system, or for the cores. A ray tracing feature test, it's basically identical performance between our 228 gig platforms, with our 64 gig platform coming in just a little behind. Same story with Firestrike and Port Royal. Again, still Nomad performance over 2000. This is a shockingly good platform for this sort of thing. I always like to use Ada64 kind of as a baseline comparison just to see how we're stacking up. And, from the Ada64 side of things, we're looking at 150 nanoseconds with 118 gigabytes per second read. This is a little weird to me to see on the Windows side of things, because on the Linux side of things, I measured over 200 gigabytes per second of memory bandwidth. Our Blender scores are very, very good. Junk Shop and Monster running from a 16-core CPU, about what you'd expect. Yes, a DGPU would be better, but, If we look at the GPU performance for Blender on the Classroom side, yeah, the score is scoring a little better. This is using the GPU built into the APU. Our Cinebench R23 multi-core score, the EVO-X2 128GB pulls a little ahead. And it does seem that the EVO-X2 out of the box is tuned to be a little bit more power hungry. You can monitor it at the wall, and it pretty consistently is using 10 to 20 more watts than the Framework desktop. Single core score, of course, across all three platforms is basically identical. It's within margin of error. For Cinebench R24, it's pretty much the same story. The EVO-X2 128GB pulls a little ahead of the Framework desktop, and the EVO-X2 64GB is holding its own as well. And of course, our single core score is basically the same across all three platforms. I always like to test CPU-Z just to see what we're working with, and the CPU-Z scores were about what I expected for both multi-core and single core. Our Geekbench CPU multi-core scores were basically identical across all three platforms, as well as our single core speed. The EVO-X2 64GB pulls slightly ahead here in single core score, which again sort of fits the pattern of, well, there's slightly more power available to that for very lightly threaded workloads. Puget Bench, I figured why not? I mean, if you're gonna use the Adobe suite, you probably are better off with a DGPU, but again, for an APU, this APU is in a class by itself. This is good as discrete GPUs from just 2 generations ago, so this is really a good result. I was slightly surprised by the EVO-X2 64GB score in Premiere Pro. I'm not sure why it's trailing behind the 128GB configurations. It's possible this could be resolved with BIOS settings, or there's something going on where Premiere Pro didn't think that it has as much VRAM available to use as it actually does, but it was repeatable. Now what about AI? Well, I'm happy to report that our AI performance is basically identical. On Windows, AMD just in the last couple of weeks has released a ton of stuff. They've got a couple of blog articles that you're going to want to check out. The beta version of LM Studio with the Vulkan backend, when running the new OpenAI, the GPT for all models, you can achieve over 30 tokens per second on this platform. And we verified that across multiple Strix Halo platforms, and this one being the slightly higher power budget, slightly more aggressive cooling. Yeah, it comes through in spades. Other models like Llama 3 70 billion, I mean, that model is like 300 and some days old at this point. That's practically like 200 years old in AI time. That model can run at 10-ish tokens per second on this platform. The more optimizations you have, like floating point 4, or if you're able to access like, you know, Vulkan optimizations and be able to do the wave matrix multiply add, it really comes down to memory bandwidth. You've got 200 gigabytes per second of memory bandwidth. And we also have lots of threads on the Level 1 Text forums about Strix Halo in general and using it with the Linux platform. Now, Windows and ROCm and LM Studio with the Vulkan backend is one whole set of conversations, and Linux as a platform and Linux for your AI experiments is a whole other different and separate set of conversations. And sometimes the same model, depending on the software platform that you're running, will have wildly different performance implications. But know that you're working with about 200 gigabytes per second memory bandwidth on this platform, which is very similar to TRX50 Threadripper. So if you're running an AI model that will fit in 120 gigabytes of memory, then it's going to run really well. And you can also check out some of our other coverage about using the USB 4 ports with an external GPU dock. That is an option, and that does give you a high-speed path for running lots of optimized AI, where some of the layers run on the GPU connected via USB 4, and some of the AI layers for the particular AI that you're running are running on the CPU or even the Vulkan backend. There's a lot of options with this platform. Now, the GMKtec Mini PC does not have a PCIe slot or any other kind of expansion, but you can do Oculink with the M.2 adapters, and you can do some creative things like that. It does have dual PCIe Gen 4 M.2. Okay, so bottom line, I've been using this for a couple of weeks. The fan can make a lot of noise, but you can configure the fan profile to make the amount of noise that you want in the BIOS. When you configure the system to be silent, it's going to use less power. There's also the P mode button on the front, and when you hit that, you get the little icon, and if you know, the red means go fast, and it's going to go fast, but it's also going to use a lot more heat. So on our kilowatt, in that mode, when we're running something full tilt, this thing's going to use 191 watts, 200 watts, 193 watts, something like that, but it's going to be louder. It's going to make noise. You can hear it. It's not annoyingly loud, but it is borderline. But you also can see that in some of the benchmarks. It's like, this is why this is pulling ahead sometimes. If you dial it back and you set 60% power in the BIOS, it's going to be inaudible most of the time. It's a you choice. You can choose. So after using this platform for a couple of weeks, yeah, Strix Halo is amazing for what it can do, especially in the AI context. If you're not interested in AI, you probably don't need to spend the premium on a mini PC like this. I wish that they had done an Oculink option or provided some kind of a path to do that. The RGB control is also just button controlled, which is fine. If you need AI or if you need 200 gigabytes per second of memory bandwidth, this is an incredible value. But if you just need a small, powerful mini PC, I don't know. I mean, you could get a small form factor PC with a discrete GPU for on the order of the same cost, but in terms of the Linux experience and the APU, this is a first-class experience. There's not a better experience for an APU-like device that's out there right now. I mean, this is a really solid value, and plus you can do all the AI stuff, and plus the shared memory. This is a very forward-looking platform in terms of software compatibility and everything else. So the reason it's so expensive is because the AI people are going to be willing to buy this, because this is a really good deal in that context. For everybody that just wants a mini PC with 128 gigs of memory, you can get one of the platforms that does SODIMMs and throw 128 gigs of SODIMMs in there, but that's going to be half the memory bandwidth or less. I'm Wendell, this is Level 1. This has been a quick look at GMK EVO-X2 128 gig version. Look for the other video on the 64 gig version. You might be surprised. A little bit of a cost savings, but still quite capable. All right, if you have any questions or if I miss anything, you want to run a workload on this, hit me up in the forum. I'm signing out, and I'll see you there.